January 31st, 1945. Clark Air Base, Luzon, Philippines. Major Frank T. McCoy, commander of the Technical Air Intelligence Unit for the Southwest Pacific, moved with methodical precision. His hands, steady despite the humidity, raised his camera to document the impossible. Before him, gleaming in the tropical sun, sat an intact Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. This was not wreckage salvaged from a jungle canopy or a skeleton pulled from the sea. This was a complete operational aircraft abandoned by its crew during the American liberation of the same airfield it had helped annihilate 4 years prior. The aircraft bore the tail number 76312. Later intelligence would identify it as a G4M2 Model 22, manufacture serial number 2134, assigned to the 763 Kokutai. Its distinctive cylindrical fuselage, nearly 20 meters from nose to tail, justified its Allied nickname, the Cigar. It rested on its tricycle landing gear like a behemoth, its 25-meter wingspan showing no battle damage. Its twin 14-cylinder radial engines, each capable of 1,500 horsepower, appeared pristine. The aircraft was even equipped with Yagi antennas, indicators for its Type 3 Ku-6 aerial radar, a sophisticated piece of equipment. But it was not the radar, nor the engines, nor the airframe that had captured McCoy's complete attention. It was what he found when he climbed inside, opening the inspection panels on the wings. The fuel tanks were completely, terrifyingly unprotected. There was no self-sealing rubber compound, the standard in every American bomber. There was no armor plating, no fire suppression system, no protective coating. There was only a thinned aluminum skin, perhaps 1.5 millimeters thick, separating thousands of liters of high-octane aviation fuel from enemy machine gun fire. Major McCoy had examined dozens of crashed Japanese aircraft across the Pacific. His unit, TAIU-SWPA, specialized in this exact work. He had seen the catastrophic fire damage, heard the pilot reports, and studied the after-action summaries. But nothing had prepared him for this. This pristine specimen, Tail 7631, confirmed a design philosophy so alien, so utterly contrary to Western military doctrine, that it would take months for analysts to fully comprehend its implications. For 3 weeks, McCoy and his team, including personnel like Sergeant H.W. Willis, dismantled and documented every system. The aircraft itself would later be repaired, stripped to bare aluminum, and painted with American stars and bars bearing the proud marking Technical Air Intel SWPA as it was studied by the Air Technical Air Intelligence Unit. The findings from its dissection were compiled into a report classified secret. Technical Air Intelligence Center Summary No. 7, Betty 22 G4M2. It was distributed to all Allied air forces, and the mathematics of its discovery would reshape American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the war. Every assumption American pilots held about enemy capabilities, about the price Japanese engineers were willing to pay for performance, and about the value Imperial forces placed on crew survival was about to be systematically demolished. The journey to this revelation, this moment of profound and shocking understanding, had begun 4 years earlier, at this exact location, under a sky black with smoke. On the morning of December 8, 1941, as smoke still rose from the ruins of Pearl Harbor, a massive formation of Japanese bombers lifted off from bases on Formosa. 82 Mitsubishi G4M bombers, joined by 26 of their predecessors, the G3M, set a course for the Philippines. Their target was Clark Field itself, the primary American airbase in the region. Their flight covered 460 miles, a feat of operational range that no American bomber at that stage of the war could hope to match. At 12:35 in the afternoon, the Japanese formation arrived, achieving complete tactical surprise. They flew at 20,000 feet, a serene and perfect formation, far beyond the reach of American anti-aircraft guns. The first wave of 27 bombers dropped 636 bombs across Clark Field's runways and facilities. Moments later, Zero fighters swept in at treetop level, their machine guns strafing every aircraft that had survived the initial bombing run. The devastation was absolute. Of the 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 were destroyed outright. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk fighter was reduced to burning wreckage. In 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines had been effectively eliminated. Lieutenant James Harrington, one of the few surviving American pilots, watched from a bomb shelter as the Japanese formation withdrew, untouched, to the north. "What struck me was how they came in," he later wrote in his combat report. "Perfect formation, high altitude, totally beyond our reach. Then the fighters dropped down and tore us apart. We couldn't get a single plane airborne. The Betty bombers had departed without a scratch. The few American fighters that managed to get airborne arrived too late, finding only an empty sky." The Betty's first year of combat would prove devastatingly effective, built on this foundation of surprise and overwhelming range. Just 2 days later, on December 10, 1941, the G4M would achieve what naval theorists had only debated for decades. 26 G4M bombers, again joined by older G3M Nell bombers, attacked Force Z, a British naval task force built around the brand-new battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The Japanese crews had been specially trained for this moment, practicing long-range over-ocean navigation and low-altitude torpedo attacks, flying less than 10 meters above the water. The attack began at approximately 12:20 in the afternoon. British reports, later compiled in the official Naval Staff History, Battle Summary No. 14, described the Japanese tactics as very well executed, noting that the enemy pilots were in no way perturbed by our gunfire. The bombers approached in coordinated waves, their torpedo runs executed with a precision that stunned British observers. The bombers carried Type 91 aerial torpedoes, each weighing 840 kilograms and carrying a 205-kilogram warhead. They were designed for shallow water operations, but here, in the open sea, they were launched from an altitude of 300 to 400 feet, noticeably higher than British practice, and at ranges between 1,000 and 2,000 yards. Captain Tennant of the Repulse reported being able to dodge a large number of torpedoes, calmly pointing out approaching aircraft and turning the ship to comb the tracks. But the sheer number of attackers and the hammer and anvil tactics they employed made survival impossible. At 11:43 a.m., the Prince of Wales, a 43,000-ton battleship representing the newest generation of British naval power, was struck by its first and most critical torpedo. The hit, confirmed by a 2007 wreck survey, was on the port side aft. It tore a massive 4 by 6 meter hole in the hull. The damage was immediately disastrous. It flooded B engine room, Y boiler room, and the port diesel engine room. Both port propeller shafts stopped. The ship's speed plummeted to 15 knots as 2,400 tons of water flooded in, and she quickly took on a 13-degree list to port. This list rendered much of her 5.25-inch anti-aircraft armament useless due to power failure or an impossible angle of fire. Already disabled, the Prince of Wales was hit by at least 3 more confirmed torpedoes on her starboard side. The Repulse, while maneuvering frantically, was caught at 12:22 p.m. by a hit amidships. Minutes later, in a final, overwhelming assault, she was struck by at least 3 more torpedoes simultaneously. Her steering gear jammed. The ship listed heavily, and the captain ordered the crew overboard. Both capital ships capsized and sank. The Prince of Wales went down at 13:20 hours, followed by the Repulse at 13:33. 841 British sailors died. The engagement, from first contact to final sinking, lasted less than 2 hours. The Japanese lost only 3 aircraft. For the first time in naval history, capital ships, actively defending themselves on the open sea, had been sunk solely by air power. The G4M Betty bomber had shattered British naval superiority in Asian waters in 90 minutes. Across the Pacific theater, through the first half of 1942, American and Allied pilots encountered Betty bombers in every major engagement. The aircraft seemed to operate with impunity, striking targets at ranges that defied conventional understanding. They hit Darwin, Australia, from bases 1,500 miles away, demonstrating a reach that exceeded any Allied bomber's capability. They attacked Port Moresby from airfields across New Guinea's mountain ranges. They struck Guadalcanal from Rabaul, a distance of over 600 miles, projecting Japanese air power across vast ocean expanses. The Betty's operational range gave Japanese forces a strategic flexibility that Allied commanders struggled to counter. American fighters, based at forward positions, lacked the range to intercept Betty formations departing from distant, safe bases. Allied airfields came under constant attack from Japanese bases that were, themselves, beyond Allied striking range. This asymmetry in bomber capability meant that Japanese forces could attack at will, while Allied forces struggled to retaliate. This advantage, however, depended entirely on one factor: limited Allied fighter opposition. When Betty formations could strike without interception, when they could approach targets at high altitude beyond anti-aircraft range, when they could deliver their weapons and depart before fighters arrived, the aircraft was devastatingly effective. These conditions characterized the first 6 months of the war, but by mid-1942, the tactical picture began to change. As American fighter strength in the Pacific increased, as Grumman Wildcats gave way to the more capable Hellcats and Vought Corsairs, as pilot training improved and tactical doctrine evolved, Betty crews began reporting disturbing, catastrophic losses. The shift became undeniable on August 8, 1942. 23 G4M bombers from the 4th Air Group departed Rabaul to attack American positions at Guadalcanal. American fighters intercepted the formation over Savo Island. In the brief, brutal engagement that followed, 18 of the 23 Betty bombers were shot down. Approximately 120 Japanese aviators died in what would become the single worst G4M loss of the entire campaign. Fighter pilots reported the same observation over and over across every engagement. The Betty exploded into flames with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere along the fuselage or wings produced catastrophic results. The aircraft earned grim nicknames that spread rapidly through American squadrons. The Flying Cigar, the One-Shot Lighter, the Flying Zippo. The Japanese crews knew. As early as 1942, with a desperate gallows humor, they had begun calling their own aircraft the Type 1 lighter. By October 1942, when Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrived at Guadalcanal commanding VF-17, the Jolly Rogers, flying their new F-4U Corsairs, the Betty's reputation had completely transformed. "First time we caught a Betty formation, we couldn't believe how easy they went down," Blackburn later reported. "Hit them anywhere along the fuselage or wings and they'd explode. We actively hunted them, recognizing them as among the most vulnerable targets in Pacific skies." During the nightly bombing raids over Henderson Field at Guadalcanal, Allied troops gave the harassing bombers another nickname. Due to high attrition and a lack of maintenance, the G4M engines frequently became desynchronized, producing a terrible out-of-sync roar. The troops on the ground called them Washing Machine Charlie. Allied pilots who engaged them described the moment of destruction with awe. One U.S. Wildcat pilot reported a G4M erupting like a paper lantern hit by a flare after a single .50 caliber round pierced its wing. Others described the explosion as a fireball so violent it resembled a magnesium flare. The mechanism was lethally simple. A bullet would pierce the thin aluminum skin, the high-octane fuel would aerosolize, and a single tracer round would ignite the vapor, triggering an explosion that ripped the wing off in seconds. The most chilling accounts came from the Japanese crews who survived. Kenji Matsumura, a veteran navigator who kept a diary during the 1942 Guadalcanal campaign, described watching a wingman's G4M take a near miss from anti-aircraft flak. "The tank fuel erupted," he wrote, and within 3 breaths the plane was a skeleton. No parachutes, no debris, just ash falling like black snow. The true extent of the Betty's vulnerability, the engineering decisions that made such catastrophic losses inevitable, would not be fully understood until American forces began capturing examples for detailed examination. The first significant intelligence breakthrough came in November 1942, when Australian forces overran Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Among the abandoned and damaged aircraft, Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit engineers conducted the first detailed analysis. The wing access panels revealed the truth. The fuel cells had no protective measures. Thin aluminum construction, no rubber sealant layer, no protective coating, no fire suppression. This was not battle damage or a field modification. This was standard Japanese design. The implications were staggering. American bombers by 1942 universally featured self-sealing fuel tanks. The B-17 Flying Fortress had incorporated them from the B-17C model onward. The B-24 Liberator had featured them from its prototype. Even fighter aircraft like the P-38 and P-47 featured protected fuel systems. This technology, which used layered rubber compounds that swelled on contact with fuel to seal punctures, added substantial weight. Allied engineers calculated that the G4M had saved over 500 kilograms, more than 900 pounds, by eliminating this protection. In American military doctrine, this weight penalty was considered essential and non-negotiable. Yet here was Japan's primary land-based bomber, produced in the thousands, with fuel tanks that offered zero protection. The weight saved translated directly into fuel capacity and extended range. The cost, in crew lives, was becoming equally obvious in loss statistics that mounted with every engagement. The final, complete technical analysis would come from Major McCoy's pristine example, TAIU-SWPA, captured at Clark Field in January 1945. His team's report detailed the specifications that explained both the Betty's extraordinary capabilities and its catastrophic vulnerabilities. The G4M Model 1 specifications revealed an aircraft optimized ruthlessly for range and speed. It had an empty weight of 6,741 kilograms, remarkably light for a bomber of its size. Its fuel capacity was a massive 4,780 liters, distributed across 8 unprotected tanks, 4 in each wing. These tanks were positioned in the wing's center section, between the 2 main spars, where they were thickest and also most vulnerable to combat damage. Any attack from the side or below would inevitably strike them. This configuration gave the aircraft a top speed of 428 kilometers per hour and, most critically, a maximum range of 6,034 kilometers, or over 3,700 miles. It was, quite simply, the longest-ranged bomber in service anywhere in the world. These numbers told the story of design choices made in September 1937, when the Imperial Japanese Navy issued the 12 requirement that would define the G4M's entire existence. The Navy, facing the vast distances of the Pacific theater, needed a bomber capable of striking enemy positions far beyond the reach of carrier aircraft. Naval bases were separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean. They needed a land-based bomber that could support naval operations across the entire theater. The requirements were not arbitrary. They were calculated based on the distances Japanese forces would need to cover. From Formosa to the Philippines, 460 miles. From Rabaul to Guadalcanal, 600 miles. The 12 specification was exceptionally aggressive, demanding performance that no bomber in the world possessed in 1937. A top speed of 398 kilometers per hour, 247 miles per hour. A combat range of 3,700 kilometers, 2,000 nautical miles, and a maximum unloaded range of 4,722 kilometers, 2,600 nautical miles. The man tasked with achieving the impossible was Kiro Honjo, who led the Mitsubishi design team. Honjo had studied bomber design at Junkers in Germany in the early 1930s and understood European engineering principles. He also understood immediately that meeting the Navy's requirements would demand compromises that Western air forces would never accept. He reportedly defended the design philosophy that emerged, stating, "Distance is our armor." Honjo and his team at Mitsubishi's Nagoya facilities faced a set of brutally simple mathematics. To achieve the required range, the aircraft needed massive fuel capacity. 4,780 liters of aviation fuel weighed approximately 3,800 kilograms. To achieve the required speed with this fuel load, the aircraft needed to be exceptionally lightweight. Every kilogram added to the empty weight reduced either range or payload. These two requirements, fuel and weight, existed in direct opposition. Fuel was heavy, and protection systems were heavier. Armor plating to protect the crew and vital systems would weigh hundreds of kilograms. Self-sealing fuel tanks, with their rubber compounds and additional structure, would add hundreds more. Allied calculations suggested this one system would have slashed the Betty's range by 400 miles. Fire suppression systems, redundant safety measures, all added weight. The cumulative weight of adequate protection would make achieving the required performance impossible. Honjo made the decision that would define the G4M. Protection would be sacrificed for performance. The fuel tanks would be unprotected aluminum, integrated directly into the wing structure. There would be no self-sealing compounds, no armor plating around the fuel cells, no armor for the crew, no fire extinguishers in the cockpit. Even the escape hatches on early models were so poorly placed they were considered useless. The design team itself gave the aircraft an unflattering nickname, Namekuji, or Slug. This decision was not made lightly. Honjo's team understood the risks. They knew that combat damage to the wings would likely prove catastrophic. But they also knew that the Navy's requirements could not be met any other way with the available technology. The choice was between an aircraft that met performance specifications but was a known fire trap, or an aircraft that failed to meet requirements but offered better protection. The Navy had demanded performance. Honjo delivered performance. The first G4M prototype flew on October 23, 1939. It met or exceeded every performance requirement. Speed was higher than expected. Range surpassed projections. The bomber entered production as the Navy Type 1 attack bomber, or Ishiki Rikujo Kogeki-ki, shortened by crews to RIKO. Due to its shape, pilots also called it hamaki, or cigar. By December 1941, approximately 180 G4Ms were in service. The Betty's combat debut at Clark Field and against Force Z seemed to validate Honjo's design priorities. When facing limited opposition, when achieving surprise, when operating beyond the range of enemy fighters, the Betty was a war winner. But these advantages depended entirely on flawed assumptions. Japanese planners had assumed that surprise and initiative would provide protection. They assumed enemy fighter opposition would be limited. They assumed the war would be decided quickly before enemy industrial capacity could generate an overwhelming force. Every one of these assumptions would prove false. The moment American fighter strength increased, the moment interception became routine, the moment sustained combat became inevitable, every design choice that prioritized range over protection became a death sentence. The Guadalcanal campaign, from August to October 1942, exposed this fundamental flaw in a sustained 6-month-long bloodletting. More than 100 G4M bombers and their crews were lost in that single theater of operations. The mission on August 8th, which saw 18 of 23 bombers destroyed, was not an anomaly. It was the new rule. By the end of August, the 4th Air Group had been effectively destroyed as an operational unit. There were no replacements. Japanese forces needed to strike American positions to contest control of the island. The Betty bombers were the only means of delivering a meaningful strike capability from Rabaul. But every mission resulted in losses that could not be sustained. By November, when the campaign effectively ended, Betty losses exceeded 100 aircraft. Crew casualties approached 700 men dead. The exchange rate was unsustainable. In combat, the aircraft's other design flaws compounded its vulnerability. Surviving crews reported that while the G4M was a stable, easy, and even pleasant aircraft to fly, its roomy interior making it a popular transport, it had a major drawback: a lack of feathering propellers. If an engine was damaged, the pilot could not feather the prop to reduce drag, forcing him to fight the controls in a strenuous, often losing battle to get the damaged aircraft home. Crews knew the odds.
The rear gunner position, a plexiglass bubble with no armor, was nicknamed the suicide seat. Some crews reportedly made the grim calculation of leaving the seat empty, gambling that the reduced weight might offer a slightly better chance of survival. On long flights, survivors reported, fuel fumes would often seep into the cabin, causing the crew to become dizzy and nauseous.
Surviving Betty crews were unanimous. The unprotected fuel tanks made survival a matter of pure chance. No amount of skill, no tactical innovation, no courage could compensate. Once hit, the Betty rarely survived. Once on fire, it never survived. Japanese engineers, facing these devastating losses, recognized that modifications were essential. Starting in March 1943, with the 663rd aircraft produced, 30mm rubber sheets were installed beneath the wing surfaces where the fuel tanks were located. But these were not true self-sealing tanks. They were a compromise, adding minimal weight while offering only limited protection. They could slow fuel leakage from small-caliber hits, but they could not prevent fires from larger-caliber rounds, cannon shells, or tracers igniting fuel vapor. The modification reduced top speed and cut the maximum range by over 300 kilometers. Crew survival rates showed no significant improvement. A more comprehensive fix was attempted with the G4M Model 3, introduced in October 1944. This variant finally featured actual self-sealing fuel tanks. But to accommodate the weight of the leak-blocking material, fuel capacity had to be reduced to 4,490 liters. This change slashed the maximum range to 3,640 kilometers, a loss of more than 2,000 kilometers compared to the original Model 1. The Betty was no longer the long-range weapon it was designed to be. The modification came far too late. Only 60 to 90 G4M Model 3 aircraft were produced by the war's end. By late 1944, American air superiority was so complete that no level of fuel tank protection would have mattered. The Betty's vulnerability became so notorious that it became a key factor in one of the war's most famous targeted assassinations. On April 18, 1943, American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications indicating that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, would be flying an inspection tour from Rabaul to Bougainville. He would be traveling aboard a G4M bomber. The Betty in question was a G4M-1 Model 12 transport variant. An operation, codenamed Vengeance, was launched. 18 P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron were assigned to the intercept, though only 16 would fly the mission. The plan required extraordinary precision. The P-38s would fly over 400 miles at wave-top height to avoid radar, navigate by dead reckoning, and arrive at the intercept point at the exact calculated moment. At 9:34 hours, exactly on schedule, the P-38s spotted the Japanese formation, 2 Betty bombers escorted by 6 Zero fighters. Captain Thomas Lanphier, Jr. and First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber broke from the formation to engage the bombers. Barber targeted the lead Betty, which carried Admiral Yamamoto. He opened fire, shot into his right engine, through the fuselage, into his left engine. The Betty's right engine began to smoke. As Barber fired again, the aircraft seemed to stop in midair and came up on one wing. Lanphier, also firing, saw the right engine light up, and then a gout of flame as the wing tore off. His radio call was simple: "I got a bomber. He's burning." The bomber exploded in flames and crashed into the jungle. In the second Betty, Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki watched his commander's plane die. "I just said to myself, 'My God,'" he recalled. The next glance revealed that the plane was no more to be seen, only a pall of black smoke rising from the jungle. Oh, everything was over now. The entire engagement had lasted about 20 seconds. The unprotected fuel tanks, struck by Barber's fire, had guaranteed that a successful interception would be fatal. There was no possibility of the bomber surviving. The Betty's vulnerability reached its most dramatic and tragic demonstration on March 21, 1945. This was the debut mission for the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, a piloted, rocket-powered suicide bomb. The Oka, nicknamed Baka, or Fool, by the Allies, carried a massive 1,200-kilogram warhead and was designed to be carried to its target by a mothership. That mothership was a modified G4M, the G4M2E Model 24J. Its bomb bay doors were removed, and special shackles were added to carry the 2,140-kilogram Oka. The mission required the Betty bombers to fly within 20 kilometers of the American fleet before releasing the rocket bomb. That day, a formation of 16 G4M2E motherships from the 721st Naval Air Group, the Jinrai Butai, or Thunder God Corps, departed Kanoya Air Base. Each carried an Oka, and each Oka carried a pilot. The added weight and drag of the Oka made the already vulnerable Betty disastrously slow and heavy. It was, as one pilot noted, an easy prey for Allied fighters. The formation was detected by American radar at a distance of 100 miles. FSF Hellcat fighters were scrambled from the USS Hornet. They reached the Japanese formation well before it approached release range. In the one-sided slaughter that followed, the Hellcats systematically destroyed the entire formation. The Betty bombers, unable to maneuver effectively, proved completely helpless. One by one, they exploded and fell into the ocean. Not a single Betty bomber survived to reach release range. Not a single Oka weapon was launched. 137 bomber crew members and 15 Oka pilots died in the attack. The aircraft designed to deliver the ultimate weapon could not survive long enough to even get it into position. The attrition rate for Oka motherships would eventually reach 70%. The G4M's design flaw was destroying its own crews more efficiently than the Oka ever would the enemy. The final mission flown by Betty bombers came on August 19, 1945, 4 days after Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. 2 G4M bombers were painted white and marked with green crosses, following Allied instructions. They departed at Sugi Airfield carrying Japanese representatives to discuss the terms of surrender. General MacArthur himself had assigned their call signs Baton 1 and Baton 2. The name was a deliberate, powerful symbol, a reminder of the devastating American defeat and the Baton Death March in 1942. Now, 3 years later, aircraft bearing that name carried Japan's surrender delegation. The delegation, led by Lieutenant General Kawebe Torishiro and Mission Commander Lieutenant Sudo Den, flew in the 2 aircraft. Baton 1 was a disarmed G4M1, while Baton 2 was a G6M1L2 military transport variant, piloted by Sudo himself. The crews wore dress uniforms, not flight suits. They were escorted by American P-38s, B-25 Mitchells, and a B-17H search and rescue plane. The escort was both protective and supervisory. The symbolism was profound. The bomber that had destroyed American air power in the Philippines in the war's first hours now carried Japan's surrender delegation in the war's final days. But the story of the G4M had one final, ironic postscript. On the return leg of the mission from Aishima, Baton 1 was undergoing maintenance. The entire delegation boarded Baton 2, the G6M transport. During the flight, the aircraft began to leak fuel. Lieutenant Sudo was forced to make an emergency landing near the TAIU River. Even in its final act, as a demilitarized vehicle of peace, the aircraft's fundamental, flawed relationship with its fuel had brought it down. The Betty's production statistics reflect both its importance and the terrible cost of its design. Approximately 2,414 aircraft were built across all variants. This included 1,172 of the original G4M Model 1 and 1,142 of the G4M Model 2, which had even more fuel capacity but still no protection. Only 60 to 90 of the protected Model 3 were built, and 30 G6M transports. The bombers served in every major campaign. But production statistics tell only part of the story. Loss rates tell the rest. The overwhelming majority were destroyed in combat, consumed by the fires their unprotected tanks made inevitable. By August 1945, only a handful remained operational. Thousands of Japanese aircrew died, their deaths made nearly inevitable by the aircraft's design. As former Flight Petty Officer Masawa Wato, who survived 28 combat missions, summarized, "The Betty was a magnificent aircraft that asked us to die for its range. We flew it because we were ordered to fly it. We died in it because that was what it was designed to make us do." The comparison with Allied bomber protection highlights the stark difference in philosophy. The American B-17 Flying Fortress featured extensive armor plating for the pilots, bulkheads to protect crew, and self-sealing tanks. The B-25 Mitchell, a medium bomber of similar size to the Betty, also featured comprehensive armor and self-sealing tanks. This protection came at a cost. The B-25's empty weight was over 9,000 kilograms, roughly 2,000 kilograms heavier than the Betty. American studies proved the value of this doctrine. Body armor reduced thoracic wound fatalities by over 75%. Self-sealing fuel tanks gave damaged aircraft a survival rate 3 to 4 times higher. The American doctrine held that trained crews were assets more valuable than aircraft, and American industrial capacity, which produced over 12,000 B-17s and nearly 10,000 B-24s, could afford this philosophy. Japanese doctrine had reached a different conclusion. The Betty's design reflected a calculation that range and striking power outweighed crew survival. It was a philosophy built on assumptions that collapsed within 6 months of the war's start. By the time those assumptions were proven false, it was too late. The examination of tail number 76312 at Clark Field in 1945 revealed the complete story. The unprotected fuel tanks that so shocked Major McCoy were not an oversight, not an expedient, and not a design failure. They were a deliberate choice. Kiro Honjo and his engineers had created exactly what their specifications demanded: an aircraft with extraordinary range and speed, optimized for the mission. The tanks were unprotected because protection would have prevented achieving the required performance. The decision made perfect sense within the constraints of 1937 technology and 1937 assumptions. But those assumptions were wrong, and thousands of men paid the price. The Betty bomber's legacy is a demonstration that performance purchased at the cost of crew survival is unsustainable. The extraordinary range of 6,000 kilometers meant nothing when the aircraft could not survive the final 100 kilometers to the target. The nation that valued crew survival built an air force that could sustain operations indefinitely. The nation that accepted catastrophic casualties for performance advantages built an air force that destroyed itself through attrition. The G4M Betty was not poorly designed. It was brilliantly designed to achieve specific goals. Those goals simply did not include bringing its crews home alive.